My friends, welcome to our channel, Unveiling the Bible. I am your friend and your guide, and today, I want to invite you to embark on a journey with me, a very particular kind of journey. This is not an outward exploration to distant lands, but an inward pilgrimage to a place far more intimate and far more mysterious. We will not be visiting landmarks of geography, but the secret country of the soul. The voices we are setting out to hear are not our own. 微调平稳，情感虔诚，带有适当的停顿和强调。The voices were stories told by a Galilean carpenter. We have a habit, you and I, of domesticating stories. We see them as pleasantries, as decorations for the mundane walls of life. They are the lullabies we use to soothe our children to sleep, the simple fables we employ to coax each other toward better behavior. But the parables that Jesus of Nazareth told are something else entirely. They are not, and were never intended to be, fairy tales with neatly packaged moral lessons. They are far more potent, far more dangerous. Think of them, if you will, as a kind of spiritual radiography. They are exquisitely designed, spiritual X-rays, crafted to bypass our sophisticated rational defenses, to move past the guards of our intellect and prejudice, and to penetrate to the very core of our being. They are designed to illuminate the deepest, most foundational assumptions we hold, assumptions about God, about others, and most uncomfortably about ourselves. They reveal the hidden architecture of our hearts, the load-bearing walls of belief that we often don't even know we have. These stories are alive. They are subversive riddles. You may think you are interpreting them, but you will soon discover that they are, in fact, interpreting you. They employ the most familiar earthly images from our daily existence. A seed in a field, a father and his sons, a wounded man on a roadside, a wedding feast at midnight. But they use this familiar vocabulary to point toward a reality that is utterly unfamiliar, a kingdom whose value system is so radically inverted that it threatens to turn our own world upside down. So today, we will do more than simply hear these stories. We will endeavor to enter their world. We will try to feel the salty morning breeze coming off the Sea of Galilee. We will try to sense the solemn weight of the afternoon sun on the stones of the Jerusalem temple. We will attempt to touch the deepest struggles, the silent fears, the simmering resentments, and the explosive joys that pulse within the hearts of each character. Together, we will trace the golden threads of grand, overarching themes as they weave their way through these different narratives, watching as they form a single breathtaking tapestry, a portrait of the kingdom of God. And the ultimate purpose of this journey, it is not merely to acquire some ancient knowledge or to appreciate historical literature. It is to respond to a profound and personal invitation to read your own life story in the light of these ancient ones. For you will be astonished, I promise you, to discover how the narrative patterns of these parables still echo with a deep and thunderous resonance in the trajectory of our lives today. So I invite you now to quiet your mind, relax your body, but engage your heart and all your senses. Our journey begins now. Before we can explore any new and mysterious continent, we must first pass through its gateway. The kingdom of heaven is no different. Before we can begin to appreciate 情感虔诚，带有适当的停顿和强调。Jesus, with his characteristic genius, marks the starting point of our entire journey with two indispensable parables. They are the parable of the sower and the parable of the Pharisee and the tax collector. 带有适当的停顿和强调。The first deals with the receptivity of our souls, the very capacity of our hearts to receive anything from God. The second deals with our fundamental posture before God, the posture that determines whether we can receive His grace. These two together determine whether we can even begin the journey, or whether we will remain standing outside the gate, wondering why the door remains closed. Part 1. The Extravagant Sower and the Choice of the Soil, Luke 8-4-15, Matthew 13-1-23. Allow me, if you will, to transport you through time and space. I want you to imagine we are standing on the shore of the Sea of Galilee. This is the northern part of Israel, a land teeming with life, a vibrant mosaic of green hills and blue water. The warm sun glints off the vast expanse of the lake, so clear you can almost see the schools of fish darting beneath the surface. In the distance, the Golan Heights rise in hazy purple majesty. The air itself is a complex perfume, the clean scent of fresh water, the salty tang of fish, and the rich, earthy aroma of cultivated land. A massive crowd, hundreds, perhaps thousands of people, has gathered from the surrounding towns and fishing villages. They are a diverse tapestry of humanity, sitting along the gentle slope of the shoreline. You can see fishermen, their skin burnished to a deep bronze by the sun, their arms thick with muscle from hauling nets. They've just come in from the water, their curiosity piqued by this strange new rabbi. 带有适当的停顿和强调. There are farmers, their faces etched with the lines of hard labor, the soil still caked under their fingernails. They have come to hear if this man truly speaks for God. There are mothers trying to hush their restless children, their ears straining to catch every word. And of course, mingling among the crowd, you can see them, a few men in finer robes, their eyes sharp and analytical, their expressions a mixture of academic curiosity and deep-seated suspicion. These are the Pharisees and the scribes, the religious experts, here not to learn but to find fault, to catch him in a theological error. And Jesus, this Nazarene, where is he? He has not chosen the formal setting of a synagogue. He is standing on a high ornate pulpit. Instead, he has likely stepped into a fishing boat. Perhaps Peter Reard has been pushed just a few yards from the shore. The boat becomes his natural amphitheater, the water a perfect sounding board, carrying his voice with clarity to the eager crowds on the bank. And when he opens his mouth to speak, he does mogen with a dense legal argument from the Torah. He does launch into a complex political discourse about the Roman occupation. He begins, as he so often does, with a story that everyone present, especially those farmers with dirt under their nails, would understand with intimate familiarity. It is a story about a man who went out to sow his seed. His voice, clear and rhythmic, carries across the water. Listen, a sower went out to sow his seed, and as he sowed, some seed fell along the path. He gestures, perhaps, to the well-trodden paths crisscrossing the fields nearby. The ground there was hard-packed, impenetrable. The seed could sink in, and the birds of the air swooped down and ate it up. Other seed, he continues, and fell on rocky ground where it did not have much soil. It sprang up quickly, you see, faster and more promising than all the rest, because the soil was shallow and warm. But when the sun came up and the heat intensified, it was scorched, and because it had no deep root to draw up water, it withered away as quickly as it had appeared. Still other seed had better luck. It fell among thorns. It found soil. It sent down roots. It began to grow. But the thorns grew up with it, aggressive and greedy, competing for the light and the air and the nutrients. And in the end, the tender seedling was choked, suffocated by the thorns, and it yielded no grain at all. But find his voice now filled with a quiet joy. Often seed fell on good, rich, fertile soil. It took root, it grew strong and tall, and it produced a crop, multiplying 30, 60, and even 100 times what was sown. The story ends. A hush falls over the crowd, punctuated by murmurs of agreement. They are nodding, if on a perfectly ordinary scene from the agricultural life they all know so well. But then, Jesus raises his voice and delivers a cryptic, piercing challenge. 带有适当的停顿和强调. The sentence acts like a flash of lightning, illuminating the placid surface of the story, signaling that this is not about farming at all. It is about life. It is about God. It is about the human heart. Later, when the crowds have dispersed and he is alone with his closest followers, Jesus unlocks the mystery of the parable for them, and for all of us who would choose to listen throughout the ages. He explains that the central character in this drama is not the extravagant sower, who casts his seed with what seems like reckless generosity. Nor is it the seed itself which is the potent, life-giving Word of God. No, the true protagonist, the focus of the entire story, is the soil. The four distinct types of soil, and those four soils, he says, are four portraits of the human heart. My friends, this is the first mirror we encounter on our journey into the kingdom. It is a stark and honest mirror. Let us summon the courage to look into it together and ask, which soil best describes the current state of my own heart? 1. The hard-packed path. The closed and calloused heart. I want you to picture the main path that runs through a village, the one that cuts across the fields. This ground was never intended for cultivation. It was made for walking, for the passage of people, of ox carts, of livestock. Day after day, year after year, countless footsteps, hooves and wheels, have passed over it, compacting the earth until it is as hard and impenetrable as pavement. When the sower casts his seed, some will inevitably land here, but it can't undeo shirdan the ting dun, huqiang delf. It lies there, exposed, vulnerable, naked to the elements. A gust of wind could blow it away. And the birds of the sky, Jesus identifies them later as the evil one, need only to swoop down to snatch away this seed of life potential before it has any chance to germinate. Jesus explains that this represents those who hear the message of the kingdom, but do not understand or receive it. Their hearts, for any number of reasons, have become hardened and closed. Perhaps it is the hardness of intellectual pride. They believe they have already mastered the truth of the world and have no room for any revelation that transcends their own experience. To them, any talk of faith is simply nonsense, or perhaps it is the hardness that comes from past wounds. They have been betrayed in trust, abandoned in hope, and so they have encased their hearts in a thick, cynical shell to prevent any new word. A word that might bring change, but also might bring more pain, ever getting in. In our own time, this wayside soil is perhaps more common than ever. We live in an age of information overload, where our minds are trampled daily by countless footsteps. The fragmented data of our social media feeds, the rapid-fire sensory stimulation of short-form videos, the sensationalist headlines of news alerts, the relentless demands and deadlines of our work. Our attention is shattered into 1,000 pieces. Our souls become cluttered, exhausted, and numb. We become so calloused by the constant noise that we lose our capacity to respond to any message that requires quiet, focus, and deep contemplation. And so the precious seed of God's Word, when it comes to us, lies on the surface of our awareness for a brief moment before it is snatched away by the birds of the next distraction, the next notification, the next urgent demand. It is lost in the casual scroll, the indifferent swipe of a finger, an inner exploration. Let us be still for a moment and examine our own hearts. Are there areas in our lives that have become like the hard-packed path, hardened by long-held prejudice, by stubborn opinion, or by unprocessed pain from the past? Do we, out of a fear of being challenged or changed, preemptively close the door to voices and ideas that contradict our own? The rocky ground. The emotional but untested infatuation. Next, we encounter the rocky ground. This kind of terrain is very common in the Mediterranean world. On the surface, it might look promising, covered with a thin layer of soil, but just beneath lurks a solid, unyielding shelf of bedrock. When seed falls here, it has a deceptively spectacular start, because the underlying rock absorbs the sun and heat. It warms the shallow soil, causing the seed to germinate with astonishing speed, faster than the seed in the good soil. It shoots up, a vibrant green spear of apparent life and promise. This, Jesus says, is like those who hear the word and immediately receive it with joy. Their response is emotional, enthusiastic, and instantaneous. Touched by the warm, accepting atmosphere of a church community, or drawn in by the immediate comfort a particular Bible verse offered them in a moment of crisis. Or perhaps they saw the potential benefits of faith: a better social network, a healthier lifestyle, a more positive outlook. They received the word with a rush of positive emotion, but this spiritual infatuation is built on the shallow ground of feeling and circumstantial benefit. The roots of the plant cannot penetrate the hard bedrock of the self to reach the deep, life-sustaining water of true commitment. And so, when the real test comes, what Jesus calls when trouble or persecution comes because of the word, this faith immediately withers. This scorching sun can be anything: being ostracized at work for holding to an ethical principle, experiencing tension with family and friends because of your new convictions, or encountering a tragedy, a sickness, a failure, a profound loss that cannot be easily explained away by simple platitudes. When faith stops delivering benefits and starts demanding cost, this rootless plant which once looked so promising quickly and tragically dies. An inner exploration. Is our relationship with faith more like a committed marriage, a thrilling but fickle infatuation? Are we seeking the God who gives the gifts, or are we merely seeking the gifts of God? Has our faith ever had to struggle painfully and in secret to push its roots down deep, to build a foundation that can withstand the inevitable storms of life? 3. The thorny ground. The divided and choked heart, the third soil, 带有适当的停顿和强调, versed a dear to the greatest number of us. The soil itself here might be quite good. It has depth, it has fertility. The seed falls, it sprouts, it even puts down roots. The problem is not the soil itself, but what in the soil. This ground is too crowded. As the good seed is growing, all sorts of thorns are growing up right alongside it. 带有适当的停顿和强调. And Jesus is remarkably specific about what these thorns are. They sound frighteningly modern: the worries of this life, the deceitfulness of wealth, and the desires for other things. This is a precise diagnosis of the modern spiritual condition. We hear the word, we are genuinely moved by it, we sincerely want it to grow in our lives, but we have so many other buts. Our hearts are filled with competitors, the worries of this life, about our careers, our performance, our mortgages, our children's futures, wrap themselves around our souls like strangling vines, keeping us awake at night. The deceitfulness of wealth, that seductive whisper from our consumerist culture that tells us security and happiness are found in having more, grows like a thorny bush, constantly pricking us with desire. And the desires for other things, the craving for approval, the ambition for success, the endless pursuit of pleasure and comfort, all fighting for the same limited resources, the sunlight, water, and nutrients of our heart's attention and devotion. The end result is that the seedling of faith, which should have grown strong, is choked by these aggressively growing thorns. It doesn't die immediately, but it becomes weak, yellowed, and malnourished. It cannot breathe, it cannot flourish, it ultimately fails to produce any mature, life-giving fruit. It represents a divided, anxious, and unfruitful state of discipleship, a heart suffocated by the world. An inner exploration. What are the thorns that are growing most aggressively in the soil of my own life? Is it a persistent anxiety about the future? Is it an insatiable desire for more possessions or a better lifestyle? Is it an overinvestment in my career, my family, or my self-image to the point where there is no room left for God to grow? Am I willing to take up the spiritual pruning shears and courageously, decisively clear out some space for the Word of God to breathe and flourish? 4. The good soil. The prepared, receptive, and persevering heart. Finally, after so much discouraging terrain, we arrive at a field of hope, so good rich soil. Jesus describes this heart as one that is noble and good, When this person hears the word, they perform several key actions. They hear it, retain it, and by persevering produce a crop. This is an open, soft, and prepared heart. It is not defensive or closed off. When the seed of the word falls, it is welcomed and accepted, but it doesn't stop at passive hearing. This heart actively seeks to understand and retain the word. It mulls it over, asks questions, wrestles with its implications, until the word is no longer just external information, but an internal, life-shaping conviction. Then it holds it fast, or retains it. In the midst of daily life, with all its distractions and temptations, this heart clings to that conviction, refusing to let it be forgotten or diluted. And, most critically, it possesses the final quality, perseverance. 得有适当的停顿和强调. It's not like the rocky ground, which sprouts immediately. It requires time. It requires weathering storms. It requires a patient, steadfast, almost plodding endurance as we continue to water, protect, and wait. And the return on this good soil? It is astonishing, supernatural. The crop it produces is not 1-to-1, but 30, 60, even 100 times what was sown. It is a life of abundance, of multiplication, of glorious fruitfulness. The ultimate revelation, the profound genius of this parable lies in how it places a responsibility for spiritual growth squarely in our own hands. The sower is extravagantly generous. His seed is cast everywhere, without prejudice or partiality. The seed itself is perfect, containing the divine potential to change the world. But the final outcome, the astounding difference between a life of fruitlessness and a life of hundredfold abundance, depends entirely on which soil we choose and strive to become. And so, my friends, the very first step on our journey into the kingdom of heaven, it is the most basic and most important work of all, the cultivation of our own hearts. Jesus is not giving us a fatalistic diagnosis, declaring that whatever soil we are now is the soil we will be forever. Quite the opposite. He is extending a hopeful invitation. He is inviting us to take up the spiritual plow and break up the hard-packed ground of our pride and our past hurts. He is inviting us to take up the spiritual hoe and remove the hidden rocks of shallow emotionalism, and he is inviting us to take up the spiritual shears and cut back the thorns of worldly anxiety and desire that are choking the very life of God within us. This is the call of the sower. It demands that we begin this extraordinary journey with a prepared and receptive heart. Part 2. The two prayers in the temple and the soul posture of grace. Luke 18:9-14. Once the soil of our hearts has undergone this initial, crucial cultivation, we finally arrive at the gate of the kingdom. This gate opens into a realm of holiness, glory, and unimaginable grace. But what is the proper posture for approaching such a sacred threshold? How should we stand as we prepare to enter this holy sanctuary? Should we stand tall, presenting our list of accomplishments and our moral resume? Or is another posture required? With another incomparably sharp and subversive parable, Jesus shows us two radically different prayers, offered by two radically different men, resulting in two radically different destinies. The target audience for this particular story is identified with laser precision by the Gospel writer, Luke. At the very beginning, Jesus told this parable to some who were confident of their own righteousness and looked down on everyone else. So I urge you to prepare yourself. This story is designed to make us uncomfortable, for it directly challenges that subtle and sometimes not so subtle sense of self-satisfaction that can lurk in every human heart. The scene: two souls in the temple. Let us use our imagination once more and step into the scene. We are in Jerusalem, the religious and cosmic center of the Jewish world. The air is thick with a complex and sacred mix of smells, the roasting meat of sacrificial bulls and lambs, the fragrant aroma of expensive incense burning on the golden altar, mingled with the dust and sweat of the countless pilgrims. In the vast outer courts, Devout worshippers move to and fro. Some are arguing with the money changers. Some are inspecting the caged animals for sale as offerings. And many, many more are standing before the temple proper, facing the direction of the Holy of Holies, praying with soft-spoken sincerity. From this sea of praying humanity, Jesus asks us to focus on two figures. they有适当的停顿和强调. From these two men represent the opposite ends of the moral and social spectrum of their day. The first is a Pharisee. His clothing is immaculate. The tassels on his prayer shawl and the phylacteries, small leather boxes containing scripture, on his forehead and arm are larger and more conspicuous than average, a public sign of his piety. In his society, a Pharisee was a revered religious role model, the gold standard of morality. They were famous for their strict and often supererogatory observance of both the written law of Moses and the oral traditions. He stands, head held high, perhaps deliberately choosing a prominent position where he can be seen. His entire posture radiates an unshakable confidence and a sense of spiritual superiority. He begins to pray. His voice is clear and loud, but his prayer is less a conversation with a transcendent God and more a meticulously prepared press conference with himself, a public report of his own spiritual achievements. God, it seems, is merely the required audience and witness. He begins, "O God, I thank you." It sounds like a good start. Gratitude is the foundation of prayer. But on what is his gratitude based? That I am not like other people, robbers, evildoers, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. His gratitude is born of comparison. It is a gratitude that requires a foil, a despised other, to validate his own righteousness. He looks around, his gaze falling on the pathetic figure of the tax collector, 带有适当的停顿和强调, and he uses him as the final stepping stone to elevate his own moral status. Having established what he is not, he proceeds to list what he is his. He begins to report his spiritual key performance indicators to God and to anyone else within earshot. I fast twice a week. The law, you see, only required Jews to fast once a year. On the Day of Atonement, his twice-weekly fast was a voluntary act of extreme piety. I give a tenth of all I get. This too likely went beyond the basic requirements of the law, which primarily applied to agricultural produce. By any external metric, he is a flawless, good person, a righteous man. 那有适当的停顿和强调. Now, let us turn our attention to another corner of the temple, a distant, inconspicuous corner, far from the center of activity. There stands the second figure. He is a tax collector. In the social ecosystem of first-century Judea, tax collectors were a despised and detested class. They were collaborators, collecting taxes for the occupying Roman Empire, an act seen as a deep betrayal of their own people. Worse still, they were notorious for using the power granted them by Rome to extort more than the required amount, lining their own pockets in the process. They were viewed as religious sinners and social pariahs. This tax collector stood at a distance. He dares not approach the sacred center, for he is acutely aware of his own unworthiness. He would not even look up to heaven. This is a posture of profound shame and self-loathing. 带有适当的停顿和强调. He can only lower his head, his gaze fixed on the dusty ground, a reflection of his own soiled soul. The only action he can muster is to beat his breast, a physical expression in that culture of extreme grief, remorse, and desperation. His prayer stands in stark contrast to the Pharisean eloquent oration. It is heartbreakingly short, yet it carries the weight of a universe of self-knowledge. He says only one thing: God have mercy on me, a sinner. Or, more literally from the Greek, God be merciful to me, the sinner. Notice the precision of his language. He does not say, have mercy on me, for I have sinned. He confesses not just to specific wrong actions, but to his fundamental identity and state of being. He is, in his own eyes, the sinner, Man wholly and hopelessly defined by his sin. He offers no excuses. He lists no mitigating good deeds to try and balance the scales. He does not even dare to ask for full forgiveness. The only thing he can do is confess his true identity and throw himself utterly and without reservation upon the one thing he knows he does not deserve, the mercy of God. The divine, subversive verdict. 2 prayers, 2 lives, 2 radically different postures of the soul. If you were a bystander in the temple that day, whose prayer would you assume was more acceptable to God? Without a doubt, nearly everyone would have chosen the Pharisee. His behavior was impeccable, his piety admirable, but the declaration Jesus makes next is like a theological bomb detonating in the holy place, shattering every religious system based on human merit, performance, and comparison. He says, with an authority that is both calm and absolute, "I tell you that this man, the tax collector, rather than the other, went home justified before God." Justified. It is a legal and covenantal term. It means to be declared righteous, to be accepted, to have one's relationship with God restored to a right standing. The tax collector, the man who in everyone else's eyes, and even in his own, had no righteousness whatsoever, was the one who was declared righteous in the divine court. Why? What did the Pharisee, with his flawless moral record and zealous behavior, do wrong? His error was not in his fasting or his tithing. In themselves, those are commendable acts. His fatal flaw was that he treated his good deeds as spiritual capital, as currency with which he could purchase God's favor, and as collateral for his own self-admiration and his contempt for others. His prayer was filled with the first-person pronoun, I, leaving no room for the grace of God. His heart contained no awe or desperate need for God, only a smug satisfaction with his own righteousness. He was spiritually self-sufficient. He was confident of his own righteousness, and therefore he had no need for God's. The tax collector, on the other hand, had nothing. He had no merit to boast of, but he possessed the one thing that proved to be of ultimate value, an unflinchingly honest and accurate assessment of his own spiritual condition. He knew he was lost. He knew he was a sinner in need of rescue, and it was precisely this clear-sighted self-knowledge and this desperate, humble plea that opened a channel through which God's free, unearned, and disproportionate grace could flow without obstruction. The ultimate revelation. This parable, then, establishes the one and only, non-negotiable posture of entry for all who would seek to enter the kingdom of heaven. It tells us that the path to God never begins with self-improvement. It always begins with self-abasement. Before the great physician, the first and most crucial thing we can do is admit that we are sick. Any attempt to gain acceptance by presenting our certificate of health, debit our moral achievements or chandel, any attell of works our intellectual knowledge, or our religious seal, will ultimately end in the same rejection the Pharisee experienced. Because the fundamental operating principle of the kingdom, the law of its spiritual physics, is summarized in Jesus' final powerful sentence. For all those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. An inner exploration. My friends, before we step further into the rich and varied landscapes of the kingdom, let us pause here at the threshold and ask ourselves with brutal honesty, when I come before God today, am I more like the Pharisee, secretly虔诚, 带有适当的停顿和强调, long or short, of my own merits? Or am I more like the tax collector, with empty hands and nothing but a single sincere cry in my heart, God, have mercy on me, a sinner? The posture we choose will determine everything we are able to see, and everything we are able to receive on the remainder of this journey. Now that we have, with a prepared heart and a humble posture, finally summoned the courage to step through the gates of the kingdom, what is the first thing we encounter? It is not a more complex and demanding list of laws. It is not a new set of behavioral standards we must strive to meet. What we encounter first is the very heartbeat of the kingdom. its central, most shocking, and most logically incomprehensible reality: the love of God. But what kind of love is this? Jesus, with two of the most stunning and enduring stories ever told, 带有适当的停顿和强调, but what kind of the Prodigal Son and the parable of the Good Samaritan, dissects this love for us, revealing its two primary dimensions. When this love is directed inward, toward the family of God, it manifests as a subversive, seemingly unfair, and unconditional grace. When this love is directed outward toward the world, it manifests as a compassionate action that crosses all boundaries and calculates no cost. Part 1. The Great Subversion of the Feast at Home. Luke 15:11-32. This is a story we have likely heard countless times. We may even be able to recite it by heart. But today, I implore you, let us set aside all our preconceptions and labels, because the context in which Jesus tells this story is one of sharp confrontation. He is not telling this story to a group of weeping sinners seeking comfort. Quite the opposite. He is responding directly to the self-righteous Pharisees and scribes. They were muttering behind his back, their complaints dripping with contempt. This man welcomes sinners and eats with them. Therefore, this story is less a gentle bedtime tale and more a sharp legal defense and a blistering critique of the religious establishment of his day. Every plot twist is like a keen surgeon's scalpel, precisely dissecting the listeners. That is, the self-righteous, cherished understandings of justice, fatherhood, family, and honor. Act 1. The younger son, cruel, betrayal, and public humiliation. The story opens with the request that in that culture was utterly shocking and horrific. A younger son approaches his aging father and says, "Father, give me my share of the estate." To our modern ears, this might sound like a young man eager for independence, perhaps wanting to start a business in the big city. But in the context of first-century Jewish culture, this was a deeply offensive and profoundly insulting demand. Why? Because the family inheritance, especially the sacred ancestral land that had been passed down for generations, was only ever to be divided after the father's death. For a son to demand his share while his father was still alive, and the head of the household, was tantamount to declaring, in front of the entire community, "I cannot wait for you to die. In my eyes, you are already dead to me. Your life is an obstacle to my freedom and my future." This was not just a severing of a personal relationship. It was a public shaming of his fathered honor and the family mean name. He demands not a gift from his father, but his share of the estate, signifying his desire for a permanent and complete break from his father's authority and the family's bonds. And the father's response is equally bewildering. Faced with this act of obscene rebellion, he does not respond with anger. He does not disown this monstrous son. Inexplicably, he agrees. Silently, publicly, he absorbs the shame his son has inflicted upon him. He liquidates assets. He divides the property. The younger son got together all he had. This all likely included the proceeds from selling that ancestral land, the land that for a Jewish family signified their identity, their history, and God's blessing. He converted it into cold, rootless cash, and then set off for a distant country. This distant country was not just a geographical location, it was a spiritual and moral one. In that distant country, a Gentile world free from the constraints of his father and the law, he squandered his wealth in wild living. He traded his father's blessing for fleeting, hollow pleasures. And finally, when he had spent everything, a severe famine struck the land, and his life plummeted to rock bottom. He hires himself out to a local citizen who sends him to his fields to feed pigs. For a Jewish man, this represented the ultimate cultural and religious degradation. Pigs were unclean animals, forbidden by the law. He was so destitute that he longed to eat the carob pods the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. Picture the scene. A former son of privilege, now in rags, reeking of filth, starving in a pigsty, in competition with unclean animals for food, and losing. He is not only financially bankrupt, but has completed his own self-exile into a state of utter separation from God's covenant. The world he had longed for had chewed him up and spit him out. Act 2. The father in undignified and disproportionate love, just as the younger son hits this absolute nodder and came to his senses, beginning to rehearse a pathetic, face-saving speech of contrition. Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants. The story in camera, with a dramatic and tender shift, pans back to the home he left behind. The text says that while the son was still a long way off, his father saw him. This short phrase is pregnant with unspoken emotion. To see him while he was still a long way off clearly implies that this was not a chance glance on that particular day. It suggests that for countless days and nights, this father had been performing the same action, standing at the edge of the village or on the flat roof of his house, scanning the horizon in the direction his son had departed, waiting with a persistent, undying hope. His heart had never left his lost, shaming son. And what happens next is one of the most moving and most culturally subversive scenes in all of Scripture. When the father sees this emaciated, filthy figure, his reaction is this: he was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. Let us slow this down and savor every action. First, he ran. In that Middle Eastern culture, for a respected elder, 带有适当的停顿和强调, it would have made him the object of ridicule in his village. But this father, in order to reach his son 1 second sooner, in order to publicly claim him before the rest of the village could hurl insults or stones in a community punishment, in order to declare to everyone by his actions, "This is my son, he still belongs to this family," in order to restore his son's dignity, he willingly sacrifices his own. He ran, and then he threw his arms around this son who reeked of the pigsty, who was covered in the filth of a Gentile land. He doesn't ask questions. He doesn't deliver a lecture. Instead, he kissed him repeatedly, an act of extreme intimacy, joy, and complete acceptance. And crucially, all of this happens before the son can utter a single word of his rehearsed confession. The father's love is preemptive. It is unconditional. It is not a response to the son's repentance. It overwhelms and even interrupts the son's attempt to earn back his place through self-abasement. Indeed, the father cuts off the son's speech before he can get to the "make me like a hired servant" part. He turns to his servants and barks out a series of rapid-fire, joyful commands. Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let him have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. My friends, every one of these items is drenched in the symbolic meaning of restored identity. The best robe was likely the father's own ceremonial robe, conferring the highest honor back onto the son. The ring was likely the family signet ring, restoring his position of trust, authority, and family identity. And sandals distinguished him immediately from slaves who were barefoot, unequivocally confirming his status as a son. He has earned nothing, accomplished nothing. Yet in an instant he has given back everything, and more honor than he had before he left. This is grace. It is not fair. It is not logical. It is disproportionate, and it is breathtakingly beautiful. Act 3. The older son's at home. Exile and righteous anger. If the story ended here with the sounds of joyful music and the smell of roasting veal, it would simply be a beautiful tale about God's amazing forgiveness. But Jesus doesn't stop. He shifts the camera's focus to the other Kencheng. 带有适当的停顿和强调. This character is custom-made for the Pharisees listening in the crowd. When the older son finishes his long day of hard work in the fields and approaches the house, he hears the sound of music and dancing. He calls over a servant and asks what is going on. The servant, beaming, tells him, "Your brother has come home, and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound." Upon hearing this news, the older son's reaction is not joy, it is rage. He became angry and refused to go in. When his father comes out and pleads with him, the older son's resentment finally erupts, unlocking the door to the secret chamber of his heart, a room filled with bitterness, scorekeeping, and self-righteousness. He says to his father, "Look, all these years, I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours," notice, he cannot even bring himself to say, "my brother," who has squandered your property with prostitutes comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him. Listen closely to his vocabulary. "I've been slaving for you." This is the language of a slave, not a son. 内有适当的停顿和强调. This is the language of an employee reporting his flawless work record to a boss, not a son sharing a relationship of love with his father. His heart is a cold, hard ledger, meticulously recording all his own merits and all his father's perceived debts to him. He has understood the father-son relationship as nothing more than a transaction based on performance and reward. Though his body has remained at home, enjoying all the resources of the father's house, his heart has been wandering in a cold and distant land, just like his brothers. He is a prodigal at home, a soul imprisoned by his own merit, his jealousy. 带有适当的停顿和强调. His jealousy and his rareness. The fatherly reply is filled with an infinite tenderness and heartbreak. "My son, you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad, because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." This sentence exposes the older son's tragic spiritual poverty. He never truly understood or enjoyed the unconditional love and abundant inheritance that was already his, because his eyes were always fixed on his own ledger and on the fattened calf in his brother's bowl. The ultimate revelation. This parable is thus often called the parable of the two lost sons. It profoundly reveals that there are two ways to be lost. One is to be lost in the distant country of sin and rebellion, which is easy to recognize. The other is to be lost in the at-home country of moral self-righteousness and legalism, which is far more subtle and far more dangerous. But both, equally, cut a person off from the joyful love of the Father. And the true center of the parable, the only disruptive agent of change, is the Father and his disproportionate, logic-defying love. For the dissolute younger son, this love is an unthinkably lavish, unearned grace. For the self-righteous older son, this same love is a deeply unfair, unacceptable offense. The story ends on a cliffhanger, an open question. The older son remains outside, the father gently pleading with him. Does he ever go in? Jesus doesn't tell us, because that question was not for the characters in the story. It was for the Pharisees listening that day, and it is for every one of us today. An inner exploration. In the story of my own life, which son do I more easily resemble? The younger son, who longs to escape all constraint and pursue self-fulfillment in a distant country? Or the older son, the diligent one who measures his self-worth by his performance and his morality, and who often feels a sting of resentment when others, who seem less deserving, receive grace? Am I willing to set down my internal ledger of fairness and enter the outrageous, unreasonable, undignified feast of grace thrown by a loving Father? Part 2. Redefining your neighbor on a bloody road. Luke 10:25-37. If the parable of the prodigal son reveals the vertical dimension of the kingdom's love, that is, God's subversive, downward-moving grace toward humanity, then the parable of the Good Samaritan reveals that love's horizontal dimension. It addresses how we, who have experienced that grace, are to practice this love between one another, especially in the borderlands of our world, the places filled with division and hatred. The story begins once again with a tense and probing dialogue. An expert in religious law stands up to test Jesus. He asks a question that sounds pious, but is designed as a trap. "Teacher, What must I do to inherit eternal life? Jesus, rather than answering directly, turns the question back on him. What is written in the law? How do you read it? The expert answers perfectly, reciting the Shema and the great summary of the law. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind. And love your neighbor as yourself. So far, so good. A flawless exchange, but the lawyer, wanting to justify himself, or more accurately to win the debate, pushes further. He asks a follow-up question, a question designed to draw a clear, manageable, and defensible boundary around his own responsibility. And who is my neighbor? This was a classic rabbinic debating tactic. He wanted a precise definition. Is my neighbor my fellow Jew, the person who lives on my street, a member of my own religious sect? He wants to know exactly who is on the list of those he is required to love, and, by implication, who is off the list. How far does my obligation extend before I can say I have done my duty and my conscience is clear? Jesus, in response, does not give him a definition. He tells him a story that will fundamentally demolish the entire framework. 带有适当的停顿和强调. The scene, fatal indifference on the bloody pass. Jesus sets his story on a road that every one of his listeners would have known and feared, a road that descends from Jerusalem down to Jericho. This is a journey of about 17 miles, but with a staggering drop in elevation of over 3,000 feet. It is a treacherous, winding path that cuts through the desolate wilderness of Judea, a landscape littered with caves and rocky outcrops, providing ideal cover for bandits and robbers. In common parlance, the road was known as the Way of Blood, or the Bloody Pass. The moment his audience heard this setting, their minds were already primed for danger, violence, and death. The story begins, simple and brutal. A man, likely a Jewish merchant, is traveling down from Jerusalem, and his worst fears are realized. He was attacked by robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him severely, and left him half dead, discarded like a piece of trash on the side of the road. There he lies, this nameless man, naked, bleeding, dying in the dust under the hot sun. And now, two people pass by on this same road. Their identities are specified by Jesus, and this is no accident. The first person to come along is, by chance, a priest. He is a man at the pinnacle of the Jewish religious hierarchy, a sacred intermediary who represents the people before God in the temple. He sees the man lying in a pool of his own blood. What will he do? Everyone listening would expect him to stop and help his fellow countrymen, but he does not. He passed by on the other side. The second person to come along is a Levite. He is also a temple official, an assistant to the priests, a member of the sacred religious class. He too comes to the place and sees the wounded man, and the result is the same. He, too, passed by on the other side. Why? Why this shocking, callous indifference? Jesus doesn't explicitly say, but his first-century audience would have immediately understood the potential, justifiable reasons. The most prominent explanation revolves around the laws of ritual purity. If the beaten man was already dead, or if he died while they were trying to help him, touching a corpse would render them ritually unclean for 7 days. This would prohibit them from entering the temple to perform their sacred duties. In their value system, in their professional code of conduct, their ceremonial service to God took precedence over the practical compassion for a fellow human being made in God's image who was dying before their very eyes. Their admirable religious piety, tragically and ironically, became the perfect excuse for their inhumanity. The shocking hero and a dissection of true compassion. At this point, the story takes its most stunning, most subversive, and for its original Jewish audience, most offensive turn. The third person to travel down that road is a Samaritan. Friends, we must pause to comprehend the complex and violent emotional reaction the word Samaritan would have triggered in the ears of a first-century Jew. This was not merely the equivalent of foreigner or person of a different faith. The phrase Good Samaritan would have sounded to them like a kind terrorist or a compassionate Nazi sounds to us today. It was a shocking, offensive, and seemingly impossible contradiction in terms. Samaritans, in the eyes of mainstream Jews, were racially impure, the descendants of Jews who had intermarried with Gentiles after the Assyrian conquest of the northern kingdom. They were religious heretics who accepted only the first 5 books of the Bible and had established their own rival temple on Mount Gerizim instead of worshiping in Jerusalem. Centuries of political and religious conflict had created a deep, unbridgeable chasm of animosity between the two peoples. The Gospel of John states it plainly. Jews do not associate with Samaritans. A devout Jew might consider food touched by a Samaritan to be more unclean than pork. And yet, Jesus deliberately, audaciously, casts this despised, hated other as the one and only true hero in a story that is meant to define the very essence of what it means to love your neighbor. The Samaritan being a response is described by Jesus in a series of concrete, detailed, and powerful action verbs. This sequence of actions is a symphony of compassion. He saw the man and he took pity on him. The Greek word for took pity or had compassion is a splangnistha. It's a powerful, visceral word that refers to a deep feeling in one's bowels or guts. This is not a detached, rational moral judgment. It is an instinctive, gut-level, overwhelming feeling of mercy. But his compassion does not remain a feeling. It immediately, without hesitation, translates into a series of costly, risky, and consequential actions. He went to him, closing the safe distance that would have allowed him to remain a spectator. He poured on oil and wine and bandaged his wounds. This was the standard, effective first aid of the day. Wine to disinfect, the oil to soothe. This was his own personal supply, his precious resources for his own journey. He used his own cloth to bandage the wounds. He then put the man on his own donkey, which meant that he, the Samaritan, would now have to walk the rest of the dangerous, rugged road, humbly leading the animal. He brought him to an inn and took care of him. He didn't just drop him off and pay. He stayed with him, personally nursing him through the night until he was stable. The next day, he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper. This was the equivalent of 2 full days' wages for a common laborer. A significant sum of money, enough to cover the man's board and care for several weeks. And finally, he makes an astonishing, open-ended promise. He says, "Look after him, and when I return I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have." He leaves a blank check. He commits to taking full, unlimited responsibility for the well-being of a total stranger, and not just a stranger, but a member of an enemy people. This was not a one-time minimal act of charity to assuage his own conscience. This was a holistic, costly, responsible, and subversive love, the ultimate revelation. The story is over. Jesus turns his gaze back to the lawyer, who is still trying to find a neat and tidy definition, and he flips the question, throwing it back at him in an entirely new form. Which of these 3, Tingduan, Huqiangdiao, or the Samaritan, do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers? Notice the brilliant, devastating reversal of the question. The lawyer had asked, "Who is my neighbor?" This is an outward-looking question of identity and classification. It seeks to draw a circle that includes some people, neighbors whom I must love, and excludes others, non-neighbors whom I am free to ignore. Jesus' counter-question becomes an inward-looking question of character and action. 带有适当的停顿和强调. The lawyer is forced, through gritted teeth, to give the one answer he did not want to give, the one who had mercy on him. He can't even bring himself to say the word Samaritan. And Jesus' final command is simple and life-altering. Go and do likewise. The revolutionary power of this parable is that it transforms the concept of neighbor from a static noun that we must identify into a dynamic verb that we must become. The great moral task is not to create a category of people we are obligated to love, but to be a neighbor to anyone we encounter who is in need. It utterly demolishes all our sophisticated attempts to draw safe boundaries around love, be they racial, religious, political, or social boundaries. It declares, in a story that cannot be refuted, that in the ethics of the kingdom of God, what determines your righteousness is not your identity, your ethnicity, your religious title, or even how meticulously you observe religious rituals. It is whether you are willing to stop your own journey, to get down in the dirt, to touch a bleeding wound, and to take responsibility for a suffering that is not your own. An inner exploration. On the road of our own daily lives, which character do we most often play? Are we the priest or the Levite, hurrying past, muttering to ourselves, "I am too busy. I have more important things to do." Or, "Someone else will surely help." Or are we willing to be the Samaritan, to disrupt our plans, to get our hands dirty, to spend our own time and money to become a neighbor to a stranger, or even to someone we dislike? On the road from our own personal Jerusalem to Jericho, who are the wounded ones that we have been passing by on the other side, armed with our own very reasonable excuses? And so, here we stand at the very heart of the kingdom. Having passed through its demanding gateway, we have seen that entry requires nothing less than a cultivated heart, a soil made ready for the divine seed. We have learned that the only valid posture is not one of proud self-reliance, but one of a soul stripped bare, like the tax collector, trusting only in a mercy it knows it has not earned. Having stepped across that threshold, we have come face to face with the staggering reality that 有适当的停顿和强调 embody love that runs with undignified, shocking grace to embrace the rebel, and a compassion that crosses every hateful divide to kneel and bind the wounds of an enemy. We have been confronted by a grace that feels too good to be true, an acceptance we could never deserve. This is the bedrock, the unshakable foundation of the world we have entered. But this very experience, as breathtaking as it is, forces a new set of questions to the surface, questions that will shape the entire remainder of our journey. This kingdom of incomprehensible love, what is its actual value? If it is truly real, what is it worth in the cold, hard currency of our lives? And if it is indeed priceless, how then are we to live? How are we to manage our time, our talents, our very existence in light of such a reality? We have seen the foundation of grace. Now we must ask what it means to build a life upon it. That is the question we will carry as we step forward into the next part of our shared pilgrimage.